All right, started the recording, and we have Ian, you're on the first agenda. Let me figure out how to screen sharing.
Sure. So I just I had an interesting experience where someone reached out to me to just let me know that they were helping someone disable sidecars on their workload that wouldn't start in a net new mesh. And so I just asked, why did they choose sidecar instead of ambient? And they said they went to our main page, they clicked getting started on the main page, and that takes you straight to sidecar, which to them says sidecar is what we recommend. So I just wanted to sort of bring that up and see if that's still where we stand. Craig has this sort of thought exercise going on to maybe make an in-between page for explaining which mode you might want. But anyway, I really just wanted to bring that up and see if anyone had opinions on that, what we should do.
By the way, I'm launching the page. If you guys can see, I think this definitely makes sense. Now that ambient is GA, we have user in production, and a lot of new users do want to use ambient. I think the way Craig is positioned, by the way, this is the first time I saw it too. He's not like promoting ambient in any way, right? It's people can choose either one. So it's not saying like this should be the default.
Yeah, I don't know if this would actually have helped the user or not. Yeah, and it's also just complexity. Like, hey, you want to get started? Too bad. You got to make a decision first, and we're not going to make it for you. So, yeah, I don't know. It seems like folks don't have that many opinions about it, so maybe we'll just keep the discussion in Craig's issue and move on.
Yeah, I think we have a bandwidth issue. Ideally, it would be nice, when they go to Istio.io, they can choose one of them, then they only see that particular one, but that's a much larger reorg. I'm going to pause here and let Keith weigh in.
Yeah, I think Lynn is on the money when it comes to the bandwidth issue. To be quite blunt, our docs just haven't. And I think Daniel's got an issue later on that sort of refers to this. Like, it just hasn't kept pace with the speed of development. Not that that's anybody's fault, but it's just sort of where we are. And we've talked about this throughout, like on the ambient question, we've talked about this throughout ambient's development. And to really do it justice, I think we would need a firmer split if we wanted to reduce the choice making. I'm also wary to. Oh, okay. Let me step back. I think I agree with Ian that the choice at the very beginning is just not great. It just tells the user that there's complexity here. There's consideration to keep in mind. If we recommend that users start with ambient mode, you should just put them to ambient mode, and maybe have a banner that says, "Are looking for sidecars, expecting proxies," or something like that. We recommend you just start with ambient. But if you have a use case, or links them to a page that goes in more detail about the trade-offs and the differences between the two. But I agree that I don't love the idea of a decision.
Yeah. Samit, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I think like as a user of Istio, also been using sidecars for a long time. Having a direction now, given we have these two modes, will be helpful. Um, Making ambient a default, I think I would like to see a little bit more on why. I know we have options or trade-offs in both cases, but I think from adoption perspective, um, how people are running it in production and what the state, just quickly, the state of ambient would be also, um, I would like to see that before I think people actually started using, like especially for our use case, we run close to like 30,000 sidecars for Istio. If we would have to make the decision in some time future, we would really like to see like how people are using it and the scale. So just when we get there on picking up our default, we should just think about have a little bit more due diligence on like why, and be able to tell people which one to choose there.
Yeah, makes sense. So I think so do you all agree what Craig has right now is better than what we have today in Istio.io? It's not perfect for sure, because we have the bandwidth problem. We also have the problem of ambient can't replace sidecar entirely, and we don't have enough user blogs or talks talking about like case studies, right? So I don't think it's right time to choose ambient as the default. But I do think what Craig has at least offers user to choose, that they could potentially think about these are the two options and which one they to choose.
I think what Craig has here is incrementally better. I would agree with that.
Yeah.
It looks better to me, although I'd probably reorder it so that ambient kept getting listed first.
Okay.
Because it's a quick start, right? So people,
Right.
this is people that are just trying to get started. They've never gotten into it before. So why not start them with what we think is the future?
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. Plus, it's also simpler for people to try. So if folks are agree with, I'm going to enter a quick comment, say, we review this. All right. Should we move to the next topic? Daniel, do you think it makes sense to have your topic next? Because you are also talking about docs where we're on the docs.
Yeah, that works for me. Mine's mostly a call for help and hopefully a reminder to people when making PRs that affect documentation. Please update the documentation or help us. We have very limited maintainers on the doc side, and it's a huge struggle when we're trying to do branch cutting. And like right now, I'm trying to troubleshoot a bunch of issues that are popping up, and it's like finding a needle in a haystack because multi-cluster is just not working in sidecar instance, for example, and there's nothing for me to work off of. So I have to go try to find it in the Istio code to figure out what changed, why did it change, and how the documentation needs to be updated to do it. So if you're making a PR on the Istio side, it'd be very helpful for docs if you also made a PR to update the docs and didn't cherry pick it to the release, just left it in master. Because the big issue right now that we're running into is multi-cluster doesn't work in 126, and I can't tell, is it dock testing that's broken that needs to be fixed, or is it Istio where the multi-cluster stuff isn't working? So does that mean that we need to put a stop on 126 until we can resolve this, or do we need to just focus on fixing the docks? And that might need to be a separate topic to discuss.
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much for looking into this. This is actual responsibility on top of what you already committed, which is the release management. I do have a quick question. I assume when we deliver PRs, when we merge PR to Istio/Istio, we don't have the same test. We test on Istio.io for multi-cluster to get the PR from merging. Is that true?
Yeah, because the tests are completely different the way the docs tests work versus our integration tests. So integration tests might pass, but the docs tests only test the commands that the docs say to run. So if you change something in Istio and change the test to fix or to use the new parameters, for example, and you don't update the docs are still going to attempt to do it the old way because there's nothing in the docs that got changed to use the new way.
Okay. In this case, I assume maybe you don't know if it's related to the commands are not being updated or.
Yep. And I don't know if it's because the commands got updated or not. I know a couple Istio cuddle outputs changed. And so those were just updating the docs to fix that. And the secret names changed in multi-cluster, but for some reason, the secret's actually never making it to the remote clusters. And trying to replicate to figure out, is this a doc issue or not, is kind of where I'm struggling. And to also figure out, is the doc even doing it correctly anymore?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, excuse me. Sorry about that. I've got a note to take a look at this. So I appreciate the triage you've already done, Daniel. So you said that the secret's not getting created?
Yeah, you can see in the output there that what it received versus what it expected. And so the secret for cluster 2 is timing out according to the status of an Istio cuddle.
Yes, I don't know. I saw that. I didn't know if that means the secret's not created or that there's no access via that secret because it's not able to sync. So I've got a note to try to run this locally and look at Istio logs because that's going to be what confirms it. So I will take a look at this. If you happen to have a repro and can forward me Istio logs, that would be really helpful. But if not, I'll just repro it later today.
You should be able to pull the Istio logs from the artifacts that I've got linked in that issue.
I will look. I think the only artifacts there were just sort of the bash output, but I will double check.
Yeah, I'll get the Istio link directly and get that to you because it's nested in one of the subdirectories.
Okay. Thank you.
Are these the logs, Daniel? The two?
Those are the actual failures, and then if you go into artifacts, and one of the subdirectories will be artifacts on the top right, and you just have to find it in there, but the Istio logs will be in there.
Okay, got it. Thank you. Yeah, I think it should be somewhere around here.
I think it's under the kind directory instead of the tests, but yeah, I'll find it and I'll put it in the issue so Keith doesn't have to go search for it.
All right, thank you so much. Yep. All right, great. Thank you so much, Daniel, for raising this, and thank you, Keith, for helping out here. Do we have Nero? If I pronounce your name correctly, I don't think he's here. So okay, so I'll move this. And that's Carsten. You want to represent him?
Sorry, I was not paying attention. What is the current topic?
Okay, so I'm just going to move it to the next meeting whenever he is here.
Oh yeah. No, I'm not. I don't know
Okay.
what's his name.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you, Carsten. Next topic, do we have German? I don't think I saw him.
I can represent Herman if he's
oh.
not already here.
Oh,
Oh,
there's Nick.
wait. Do you want to share or you want me to share?
I can't share. I'm on mobile, so if you want to share, that's great.
Okay.
So Herman and I are collaborating on a way to represent tags that does not require mutating webhook configs. This is something that we've discussed a few times in the past. So kind of wanted to refresh the conversation, bring it back up again. Particular motivation is that mutating webhook configs represent a security risk to many of our users. And so it's, well, and they're not strictly required in order to run ambient the way that they are to run sidecar. So we want to run with the principle of least privilege, which means not installing mutating webhook configs in ambient only clusters. We've got a few ways of going about doing that, and they're sort of explored in the document. We've talked before about having a custom API for these sorts of operations, like a tag CRD perhaps that could represent tags. That's the primary proposal in the document, and one that Herman has explored. I'll say I'm actually a little bit more in favor in the alternatives considered section of using service as a way to define a tag, since it's already effectively acting as an alias for the Istio service. Why not make it a proper service name and go through the API like that? Either way, the goal is that if you're running ambient with sidecars, which of course is something we're exploring in migration, your Helm chart or your Istio cuddle command that you use today to create tags would create both the new object, either a service or a tag object, as well as the mutating webhook config. But if you're not running sidecars, if you're not supporting sidecar mode, then it would only use the new API and not write a mutating webhook config. So the goal is not to push users out or to limit functionality. There's entire backwards compatibility supported, but allowing users to have a better security posture when they're running ambient. I think that's most of the spiel. Did anyone have questions or concerns with this kind of change?
I think directionally we may be moving in a way where you no longer need Istio CRDs to be installed in order to run. I don't know if we're like fully there yet, but introducing a new like required CRD to represent tags probably throws a wrench into that movement. And so to that end, I agree, I think, with your idea of using service to define this rather than new resource.
Do you have examples on how to do this with service? Would that through label or annotation, I assume?
There is an appendix at the end of the document. Mitch, I edited yesterday.
Hey, Herman is here.
Yeah.
By the way, everybody, this is my coworker, Herman.
Hi.
He's been a part of the team that manages Istio at AKS in terms of our add-on for quite a while now, but I think this might be his first time at our community meeting.
Nice to meet you all.
Hey, welcome.
Yeah, welcome. Sorry, I totally pronounced your name incorrectly early on.
No worries, no worries. Everybody makes the same mistakes, and I'm very used to that, but that's fine. Yeah, it's Herman, yes.
Okay, well, is the example
Should be at the end of the document. It's Appendix B. Yeah.
okay, thank you.
Yeah, what I did was taking the already existing service template, and I think I just added an Istio, the Istio.io tag that's the first label. Actually, not yeah, the Istio.io tag label, and yeah, I think that's all I did. I decided
You
to
changed the
ask.
name as well.
Yeah, I also changed the name. I used the suffix of the tag, and I use the same ports as the existing service. Um, we might not use them right now, but potentially in the future we could be open to use this service to access Istio the control plane. Not a need right now, but we can add it there if we are okay on that.
So for reference, what the current tag API does, or it's not exactly an API, but the Helm chart and the Istio cuddle command, when you point it at a particular revision, it goes and gets the mutating webhook of that revision and effectively copies it, just changing the selectors to use the name of the tag that you've supplied rather than the name of the revision. So this copies the service instead of a mutating webhook config, modifying the name and adding the tag label to map the stable tag to revision 117. I think I saw a hand go up.
Yeah, Keith.
Yeah, so sorry, I was trying to follow along. I hadn't had a chance to read the doc a bit as detailed as I'd like to, but correct me if I'm wrong. So with the CRD approach, with a subcontroller that is creating a mutating webhook configuration, and the service approach, what is creating the mutating webhook configuration?
It would still be Helm and Istio cuddle, just like it is today.
Okay, good. I do prefer that, so that you don't have to create, like, Istio doesn't have to have mutating webhook creation privileges.
As a side note, we currently do have mutating webhook configurations, and it doesn't even appear to be guarded by a Helm flag. That's probably something we should consider cleaning up. But I agree that whether we have it today or not, we shouldn't have it.
Agreed. So the idea is that with this option in the service, Istio cuddle and Helm would create a mutating webhook configuration with the service for the mutating webhook set to this.
Actually, I'll modify that just a little bit, Keith. I'm not sure I would change anything about the mutating webhook that is created. Technically, this IstioD stable service doesn't actually need to be used for any calls to services. The important thing is that IstioD watches these services, particularly with the tag and revision label, to understand which tags map to which revisions so that it can control the proper objects. It's not actually needed technically as a service name, but service seemed like a really good API to represent this. And it also, we could use it as a service by, as you said, mapping mutating webhook configs to it. We could even tell the proxies to talk to IstioD stable if they're part of the stable revision. I'm not sure we want to go that far, but that's why service seemed like the most reasonable object to use here.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that.
So to make sure I understand, there will be no webhook, no mutating webhook at all. So if you're in pure ambient mode, there will be absolutely no webhook.
No mutating webhook. Still, we need the validating webhook, but yes.
Well, we still need it for what?
For validating.
I mean, it's not required. It's optional.
I mean, it's. I don't think we have a way of
validation.
supporting. As far as I know, that is a required part of Istio installation. We've had some scenarios where it's been accidentally disabled, and customers have created configurations that then cause IstioD to panic. So I would not feel comfortable removing the validating webhook yet. I think it's a great goal. We can probably replace it entirely with VAP, as is being commented in the chat, but not today.
Okay. Okay. Let's tell. But so you are basically using a service just as a way to convey some information, some labels,
yes,
some data.
Tag to revision mapping.
That's very reasonable. I mean, the service pointing to IstioD. It's very reasonable for IstioD to have maybe multiple services pointing to it. I don't see what is wrong with that. I mean, it's exactly what we are doing anyway for IstioD.
Thanks.
And also, that's basically defining a set of names, or DNS names that are pointing to IstioD that can be used by different entities that want to connect to a specific IstioD if they want that specific version.
Yes.
Okay, it's important to document this, emphasize it, because with sidecast and other places, you may be able to have fine control and decide where do you want to get your configuration from.
Yes, that service could eventually, Austin, I know you've talked about putting Istio behind a gateway. That service could totally be behind a waypoint, theoretically. There's some complication with the waypoint coming from the same service mesh control plane as it's representing. Bit of a chicken or the egg problem there, but overall, this does sort of fit with that architecture.
It's not a chicken and egg if they are collocated. I mean, you can easily collocate an Istio with a gateway, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I have a simple question. Sorry, I didn't read the doc, so if the question is too simple. So how do you actually, I think, so first of all, retire a mutating webhook for ambient, I think makes a lot of sense, right? Because we don't really need mutating webhook for ambient. But my question is, how do you actually know user only use ambient? Because when you install Istio with ambient mode, you could potentially still run sidecar. So how do we actually have the intelligence knowing they are like ambient only mode? I don't think we have a profile like that today.
Well, so today we don't support running ambient with sidecars. So if ambient is enabled, there should be no sidecars involved in the mesh. That being said, I don't expect that heuristic to hold up as we begin to support migration. We're going to need to have a separate way to indicate whether we intend to have sidecars present and supported.
Yeah, I mean, today the ambient profile, we may not support sidecar, but we definitely have user running that way when they move to ambient, right? There's nothing we did, as far as I know, when I tried it, there's nothing prevent user from running sidecar in the ambient profile. Stephen.
Yeah, well, do we not allow having sidecar in one namespace and then ambient in another? I thought that was.
You could. I think what we're not promising is the interoperation. Yeah.
So you could totally do that with two different meshes. It's not a recommended, way to do things, but you could install two different meshes in one cluster, have one mesh controlling one namespace, another mesh controlling another namespace, and that will work just fine. The mesh that uses sidecars will have mutating webhook configs. The mesh that uses only ambient will not, and that works. Where it becomes a problem is when you're trying to have ambient and sidecars in a single mesh. Particularly, the sidecar is able to originate HBone connectivity. So send a request, say, to something that is backed by a Z-tunnel. Of course, that's courtesy of the fact that waypoints already have to do that. But as I understand it, Keith, you can jump in here, but there's some difficulty with sidecars terminating HBone today in ambient. So that's not yet supported.
I just saw this last week. Part of our migration work. I just saw this last week. I think like sidecars do have to connect to terminate listener. So in theory, sidecars can terminate HBone.
Yeah, I'm looking at the sidecar ambient document. It seems like the only thing that is not available is sidecar to waypoint interop.
Right, that's the not working. But we also said you could potentially run sidecar in one namespace, Stephen, exactly the scenario you said, and ambient in another namespace, and they don't need to talk to each other. They might just be talking to the gateway or within their namespace. So that's supported too.
Yeah, so it seems to me that it would, in terms of future proofing, we know we want to support migration, and we know that migration will support running both concurrently, and at least temporarily. So it would be good to come up with a Helm heuristic for whether sidecars are supported. In migration mode, you would say ambient and sidecars. In ambient only, you would say sidecars false, ambient true.
I think we are still trying to do a spaghetti of two different things and mix things together that should not be mixed. I mean, you install ambient, your intent is to use ambient. That's basically one Istio with a set of configurations, whatever. You can also install multiple things in the cluster. You can install a Istio that is controlling the sidecars, just like a revision. And each revision may have, you may have revision 1 supporting sidecars, revision 2 supporting ambient, and revision 3 supporting a completely different mesh. It's all supported kind of. So it's not like you cannot mix or you cannot have both ambient and sidecar at the same time. It's just that the Istio dedicated for ambient doesn't have a mutating webhook because it's intended for ambient, and the Istio that is dedicated for sidecars will have a mutating webhook because that's what it does.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
So how about I'd propose that Herman and I work with Jackie and John, who are leading up the migration work, on coming up with a Helm heuristic for whether sidecars should be supported, integrating that with the Helm profiles so that our customers are capable of running an ambient only mode or an ambient and sidecar mode that will be in line with the direction for migration. Does that sound reasonable?
Yeah, that sounds reasonable. So as long as that profile is ambient only, I think it makes sense to disable, retire the mutating webhook.
Yeah, I agree. As long as we clearly define these modes, then then I think we can revisit this conversation.
As long as we don't overcomplicate it and try to again make something do two things at once. I mean, if the requirement is to have a clear separation, so you're guaranteed you can install the ambient profile and then you can go and install the sidecar profile, and you have both of them at the same time and they don't conflict Helm naming. That's very reasonable, but trying to have ambient decide by heuristic or complicated logic if it should also have sidecars, I think it will be pretty bad.
Yeah, no, I'm thinking something more like a Helm value that's true or false. Sidecars, yes or no.
That's what I'm saying. We should probably not do. I mean, the point
Oh, that's
is,
a complicated heuristic.
in the sense that you know, it's basically you need to, how do you keep them separate and have different settings for them? And it's much simpler to just have ambient. You just super easy installed. It's on by default. You don't have to worry about it. And then you install a second profile with a second Istio for sidecar. It's not a huge burden to have. I mean, if you are willing to pay the price for the sidecars, it's not a big deal to have a second Istio dedicated for sidecars.
I see what you mean. I would need, like, I'm not running the migration sort of work stream. That's Jackie and John, so I would have to defer to them on that. But that, to me, it sounds reasonable.
So that means the sidecar and the ambient Istio needs to share the same certs, the root cert or intermediate certs, right?
Yeah, I mean, that they do anyway. I mean, all revisions of Istio support the same cert. I mean, we already supported it for a very long time. You have each revision, it's identical. And you can have N. I mean, you can have 2 revisions of Istio for sidecars and, you know, 1 or 2 revisions of Istio for ambient if you want to have.
Right, that's what I'm thinking. You could have 4 combination as you are moving between versions.
And that's a good thing because for each of them you can have slightly different settings. I mean, for one revision you may have sidecars which default to MTLS strict and whatever. Another one where you have sidecars with some special modes that is making it easy to migrate. So you kind of do step-by-step migration by doing workload by workload move to a different.
Yeah, I like. I mean, workload by workload is something we're very interested in, and obviously revisions already support that, so that's really nice. On the flip side, right now we have the data plane mode label that we use for ambient inclusion or enrollment. So I'm just trying to think of how that would work if I had a namespace, or let's just say one workload that was on the sidecar revision, and I changed the label of that workload to be now the ambient revision. I would also need to add the ambient label. We could probably work around that.
If I remember correctly, the ambient data plane mode is also checking if a workload has sidecar. So you can have ambient enabled by default in the entire mesh.
Oh, that's right. And ambient won't kick in until the sidecar goes away.
Exactly. So even if you have ambient everywhere, you can still have a workload that is using sidecar if you choose to, if you need to. If you have a workload that you want permanently to keep it with sidecar because you have to do something client side, it's perfectly fine. It's a valid configuration.
That is true if you have only one control plane, but if custom what you are proposing, if I'm hearing it correctly, is ambient has a dedicated control plane and sidecar also has a dedicated control plane, then you have to be careful as you transition, you know, make sure the tag and revision are doing correctly. That's the complexity I think would throw onto the user.
No, but you simply, it's not complexity because again, ambient is super clean, super simple. And for sidecar, again, you already have the complexity of sidecar. So it's reasonable to have a clear So it's to not mix them basically. That's the simplicity by keeping them separate.
The big issue you're going to run into, though, and I don't want to derail this too much, but because I know that we've got maybe some other topics or also the doc, but the big issue you run into with a separate control plane. Oh, that's the last one. Perfect. The issue you run into is if you're running sidecar with Istio CNI, you can't have a full separate control plane. You have to have a single CNI for both, which might be fine.
Why?
Because CNI is a singleton, right?
Right. So you would have to make sure they're on the same version. So you would be running 125 Istio sidecar, 125 Istio ambient. And
Yeah,
then
but
CNI.
CNI is controlled by the main Istio. I mean, it's not CNI is kind of separate, and CNI data and Z tunnel are kind of owned by ambient more or less.
Looking through the CNI code, there's basically two modes to run CNI in. There's regular mode, and then there's regular mode plus ambient. When you turn on ambient, it doesn't seem to turn off other functionality as far as I can tell.
Yeah,
okay, so CNI stays owned by ambient. That would be fine. And then what about... So would the idea be that you all the same policies also get applied unless you specifically label them with a revision as well?
Well, kind of. I mean, sidecar will have additional policies because that's the whole point. You have the client-side policies, all the destination rules that are not supported in ambient are available to. So it's not identical, but everything that is in ambient is visible in sidecar. But some sidecar has some extra features, basically.
Okay, so you saw that labeling, and then the last thing that I was thinking about, just to make sure I understand all this, would it be leader election? Do we have you thought about leader election between those two? Because if you have two separate Istio installations, you'd have two completely separate leaders. If you don't have, go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's something that is well tested, well supported. We had it for a very long time already. I mean, we know. I mean, the oldest version wins, I believe, and both revisions can be leader if they're on the same revision. That's well tested. I mean, had 2 or 3 years of
I think that I agree that's well tested, but I'm not sure if it would work for our purpose, because let's say if you have a Istio D that knows how to program sidecars, and that Istio D, through leader election, the one that's knows only program Z tunnel and waypoints wins, I wouldn't expect that one knows how to program sidecars. So
right, like who writes gateway status if they both can?
So
right. Gateway
status is already controlled by revision, or at least we've got a bug fix out for it. Like at the moment, there were some difficulties with it, but it is already like each revision has a status leader, and you're only going to get status information from the revision that your gateway belongs to.
Okay, so you can have the same revision. Okay, go ahead, Costin.
Sorry, all services that are subject to leader election are independent and can be implemented by any instance of Istio on the same version. So if you are on 117, you know that any Istio that is running that particular version will have the same behavior.
So sure, I'm talking about them fighting.
So my gut tells me that we should give the team that's running with migration time to work on this. It's a cool idea. But I don't want to get too far in making design decisions before they've even got a doc put together.
I agree.
As far as the tag stuff goes, I'll just say we'll do whatever fits with the migration strategy in terms of helm values. We'll work with that. If it's each sidecar and ambient are mutually exclusive for a control plane, we can work with that. If it's that they each have their own Boolean values, we can work with that. But I want to leave that to that kind of sub team and not step on their toes.
I agree. That makes sense because I think there's a lot of implication beyond what we discussed here. We have to think through.
Speaking of implication, one more question. How do you deal with external control planes? Still create service or how do you represent it?
So with external control planes, you have a service in the Istio system namespace that represents that external control plane. And So we would just take a copy of that. So if you have if you have a service that uses, what do they call it? What's the field in Kubernetes? External service name or something along those lines? We will just copy that field over to the tag. And really what we care about most in the tag service is the tag and revision labels of the service.
I don't think that the external services have use the external service in service. It's basically the mutating webhook that has is injecting the foo.example.com control plane address, but there is no actual service because the service is Istio system cluster local. So
it does create a service today. Whether it uses it or what the role of that service is, I couldn't say, but
okay.
I'm working with those
right service now. Is perfect. Maybe have some annotation or something in the service to indicate, because I'm pretty sure it's not creating a service with the weird Kubernetes type, because that's, but whatever it is, if we have a service and there is some indication that is an external control plane, it's perfect.
Okay.
All right, there's a hand from Tilway.
Yeah, hi, can you hear me? I have a quick question about the put the tag and the revision and service. So what if we want to mapping both stable or default to 1.17? So
in that case, you would have one tag service called Istio stable, just like we have there in Appendix B. And then you would have another called Istio default with the tag label set to default.
Okay, but the rest are the same. I mean, the spec of...
Yes, because they point to the same revision, they should have all of the same other values.
I see. Cool. Thank you.
Oh, and we covered in the doc just one small thing. We'll need to have a precedence between the two, just in case they ever diverge. You know, a user manually edits a service outside of Helm or Istio Cuddle or something like that. And for those situations, we feel like the mutating webhook should take precedence because it's been the established API. So when there's a conflict of data, we'll side with the mutating webhook. That is assuming we have a mode that supports both at the same time. I suppose with Costin's proposal that it's possible we may not even need to do that.
Yeah. If we decide to do that, which I'm not a big fan, I think it introduces additional complexity. By the way, I have a quick question. This is the only topic. So, what's the user experience if I want to label this? Do they just go to their service to label it, or do they do it through installation time? I assume it's maybe installation time.
The idea would be installation time. Well, installation time, we're using the CLI. The two APIs that we support today for modifying either revisions or tags are Helm and Istio Cuddle. So we would support those two for creation of tag services as well.
Okay, so basically,
obviously we can't stop users from doing whatever they want after they Helm install, but that's true with mutating webhooks as much as it is services.
Okay, so basically, if they mess up the label after the install, it could, be out of support, right? Because
yes, just like if they messed up the mutating webhook today.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense.
If they go and hand edit that, they're kind of on their own. Hopefully, they're using some sort of a GitOps system that has drift detection, and will overwrite that with time. But that's going to depend on their environment.
Yeah, that makes sense. Any other questions on this topic? I think we beat it pretty hard.
Hey, thanks everybody for your time. I appreciate everybody joining in. And thank you, Herman, for putting together a very detailed design doc.
Yes, thank you so much. Should we give each of you 9 minutes back? Thanks everyone for joining. Bye.
Thanks. Cheers.
Thanks, y'all. Bye.
Thanks, all.